Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Cricket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Shaman's Way podcast. I look forward to chatting with you today about divination and chakras. And you may wonder what on earth could be similar between chakras and divination. However, bear with me. I am sure we have a story for each other. For as long as humankind has expected a future, we have been forecasting it. There is, I've come to understand, a difference between prophecy and divination. So the difference between prophecy and divination may exist to some, but it doesn't mean that that exists to others. Prophecy has long been held as a sacred communication between the divine and between us, the humans. So it would be, we've all heard of different types of prophecies. It was eventually when the shamans became priests and priestesses, it was the priest and the priestesses who were regarded as receiving prophecy. I remember the first time I publicly prophesied. It really, really freaked me out. I was all of 17 years old, and my parents were very strict Christians at this point in time. We belonged to the Businessmen's Gospel Fellowship, blah, blah, something like that. And my mom went to the women's portion of it, and being, 17, I attended the women's gospel luncheon with her. And we were standing up, much like we would do in a circle, and with our eyes closed. And I recall my eyes closed and my arms stretched out. There has to be a recognition from me to understand or to say publicly that spirit is spirit, regardless of what you put on it. Whether or not Christianity is something that you think of in a generous way or think of in a negative way, I don't really think is relevant at this particular moment. I think spirit really is spirit, regardless of what hat, what voice, what face, what denomination, what, whatever we put upon it. So the room was very heavy with spirit. What I initially noticed was that my eyelids partially opened and froze. Then my eyes started to whip, like move so quickly from side to side. And no matter what I could do, and trust me, I tried. My conscious brain was trying. No matter what I could do, I could not physically open my eyes or change anything about their movement. And I did seek to try. My conscious brain felt like it was in the back of my head somewhere, and I was completely taken over. I spoke in a voice that was commanding and yet gentle, telling of a time when this particular religious organization would build homes for prostitutes and young mothers. And there are other things mentioned, but what struck me as equally powerful as being ridden by a spirit, even if it's just for a brief period of time, was the absolute acceptance of what was spoken through me was truly delivered from the divine. These ladies at this luncheon had no issue believing what had just occurred. In fact, turned to me with open faces, with beautiful smiles. And when the spirit left me, I felt released. I was shaken. I remember my legs were shaking. I remember my body was shaking. And there was this remarkable sense of peace as well. Throughout many of our myths, there are references to prophecies, such as Apollo, the god of prophecy. This I found interesting. The people of Knock in Mayo, Ireland, used to have a prophecy or a legend that a great silver bird will fly down and take people away. Well, many years later, the Knock airport was built in the area. It turns out that the people wanted to go with the great silver birds. The Hopi have prophecy that are very detailed and also written about fairly extensively. If it interests you, I recommend reading what you can. It is fascinating and it is quite mind-opening. The bridge between the two worlds is that prophecy generally follows divination. So now we're taking this spiritual reality and now we're trying to bring it into the spiritual, physical aspect of self. We're working with divination. And divination is commonly described as methods of obtaining secret knowledge from an invisible realm through communication with divine sources. How many of us have had omens? Many of us act as oracles, have seen oracles. We've all had that experience, or many of us have had the experience of signs or portents. Now, my grandmothers and my grandfathers and your ancestors too placed great wisdom and honor in the wisdom of the diviner. And the divination process establishes contact between the human world and the world of the spirit. Learning divination seriously was a hit and miss process for me. As diviners, we have an essential role of that of interpreting signs. Now, diviners, let me just back up and explain for a minute. When using pendulums, we're all called diviners. Some of us are geomancy. Some people have geomancy title. Divining is also using anything from what I use as stones, bones, nuts, and teeth. The tarot cards, there's all sorts of forms of divination. So I'm taking a collective approach and not an individual approach. There are many differences of seeking information, interpreting information amongst diviners. And what I truly wish to do today is distill into some of the simpler aspects this use of divining and divination. And it has been a hit and miss process for me. So if you experience a hit and miss process, then by all means, give yourself a pat on the back and have some compassion, because we all learn. As diviners, we have that essential role of interpreting signs. Connecting to spirit in a tangible form has helped me to listen. And it also helps me to work with what I refer to as that invisible realm, or that beyond the veil realm. However, to me, I've never thought of it as invisible necessarily meant the unknowable. And as I grew in awareness, I remembered to look for signs from the invisible realm. The irony of which is, how can we see the invisible if we don't look for it? So, what I wish to discuss is pendulums and chakras. And you are all within your thought patterns to ask, what does one have to do with the other? Learning to read signs is so of interest to me that by seeking patterns, our bodies contain these patterns. They're physical containers. Our bodies are physical containers for spiritual insight, for knowledge, interaction, and relationship. Chakras are important in developing our own self-awareness, as well as learning to read that language on a friend or a patient. I generally work with 8 chakras, the transcendent chakras. I've also worked with chakras below the feet, and I generally also read the energy flow on the knees of people if I have them on the massage table or if I'm doing some work with the chakras. However, today for this particular podcast, we're just chatting primarily about our 7 chakras. Now, how the pendulums, I want you to, this is where we introduce pendulums, right? Introduce the idea of pendulums. If you don't have a pendulum, and if you don't know the basics of the pendulum, there are a plethora of resources at your fingertips, probably in your library, your bookstore, and most certainly on the interweb. So, as I had said, the pendulum doesn't always spin in circles. And if it does spin in circles, I pay attention to the speed and the size of the circles because they indicate different energy levels. And the front chakras and the back chakras also share different information. The collective unconscious, that all amazing realm that includes so many things, it really, you can think of it as a vast storehouse for the shared memories, experiences, wisdom, as well as the universal archetypes of the human race. Carl Jung wrote extensively about archetypes in one of his books called The Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. It describes archetypes in patterns of behavior. And because we are connected to the collective unconscious through our subconscious mind, Jung believed these patterns, or perhaps even models of conduct, both positive and negative, or what I think of as, the expected side and the shadow side. What they do is they help us to organize our experiences and almost become, in a sense, a vessel or a guide to some of the unconscious behaviors. Jung further prophesied that archetypes emerge from a core of common human experiences. And Carolyn Myss, she's also wrote extensively on chakras, the naming of the chakras, and the shadow side and the positive side. So there are many references to these ideas, and Jung may have brought this into or picked up with it and have run with it and expanded on some of his initial ideas. For me, I often tell stories of warriors, and there are many stories of warriors in cultures worldwide. So the warrior hero is courageous and steadfast, willing to risk life and limb in the cause of justice. So that would be an example of the synopsis of what the archetype would be. Our emotions are stirred as we watch the warrior struggle against and overcome insurmountable odds. And I like that we engage that. Many of us engage that aspect, or we want to be like the warrior. We have all struggled in our life, and many of us have overcome what seemed at the time like absolutely insurmountable odds. Insurmountable odds. At a subconscious level, we form an emotional kinship and relationship with a collection of archetypes, and these influence our behavior, and they help us to make sense of our daily experience in the world. They help us to seek patterns. They help us to accept, oh yeah, this happens. So I'm dealing with somebody, say you work on a job site, and you are working as an electrician, and in your job you would meet the standard archetypes of male behavior in the types of jokes, the shortness of or the shallowness of mentality, and those sorts of things, because that is the expectations of things, because that is the expectation of that trade. So that trade has an archetype. It doesn't mean that the individual workers are specifically that archetype, but we have an understanding or a short-sighted stereotype of what that trades person is like, XYZ. So it gives us a manner of categorization. So our emotions get stirred up. We form emotional kinship with these collections. They do influence our behavior, and they do help us make sense of the daily experiences in the world. The trick for me was to understand how to become aware of which ones, particularly the negative or the shadow sides that are influencing not only my behavior, but the behaviors of others. So now I'm going to talk about and bring this a little bit further into the 7 chakras. And why do I do that? Because I believe that there are articles that are written that have associated archetypes with the 7 chakras. I didn't know about that many years ago. Many years ago, my spirits, in order to help me find health, they expected me or shared with me that they expected me to journey to each of my 7 chakras and introduce myself to that guardian of that chakra. And I'll talk about more of that later on. But right now, I really want to talk about the chakras from a physical perspective. Again, the part of what we're doing is we're attempting to understand spiritual information in a physical form, and the chakras in a physical form. And the chakras have the ability to carry very deep, very profound information and knowledge, not only about your own self, but really about many generations or relationships of generations you have with others. However, we're working specifically with the most tangible relationship, how to read a pendulum when it's over top of a chakra. So how do you use a physical object to interpret an abstract object? I mean, you can feel the chakras. Some of us are very sensitive and have healing hands and can sense this and don't necessarily need a pendulum. However, I like to use pendulums. When the chakras are open and balanced, they're represented by a particular archetype of our subconscious. When they're unbalanced, they can either be blocked or too open. If this is the case, sometimes we can interpret that this might be the shadow side of the archetype or the shadow side of that guardian for your chakra. Chakra, as I was corrected many times in one of my yoga classes, chakra. An examination of each chakra in terms of its archetypes or its guardians can be extremely helpful in understanding where we are along the path of our spiritual journey. It's helpful to understand what work we need to do in order to balance the chakras in light of the positive, in the light and the positive aspects of archetypes. So the chakras seem to be specifically designed to act as one level, kind of like similar to a tuning antenna. So it's aligned with different aspects of the physical, the emotional, the spiritual, radiant information, and bring that information down into the density of the body structure so the body can utilize it. Additionally, more refined tuning occurs at the molecular level. As genetic receptors, they get information at an even greater level of vibration frequency. When we work with the pendulum, when we understand the chakras, we understand that we are working not only with our physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual self, but we cannot deny the effect of the generations behind us. We've talked about this in curses. We've talked about this in compassionate depossession. Talked about this in doing some of the journey work. So if we learn to understand that fine-tuning, we may be able to also take this to a deeper level. But right now, what I would like to do is just go through some of what I have learned with regard to the spin rate of the chakras. So the higher the chakras spin, the higher chakras generally spin faster than the lower chakras. There is a direct relationship between each individual chakra center and the specific ranges of energy within the human creation matrix. The chakra is the interface point, the energetic organ linking different aspects of the physical body to its non-physical counterparts. Think of it like as a spider's web, that spider's web, or maybe that golden grid or the matrix grid that we see. So each has a direct relationship between your individual chakra center and the specific ranges of energy within that. When we look at pictures or diagrams of the chakras, especially from an Eastern perspective, each chakra has its own geometric shape, and that represents the different layers or the different dimensions of spiritual energy that particular chakra is emanating, receiving, and has been studied from ancient texts. And in those ancient texts have come to determine this chakra relates here, this chakra relates there, this chakra relates there. There are 7 primary chakras and endocrine systems or glands. Now, it's very important to understand that chakras can shatter and need to be rebuilt. And can you recognize any patterns you see in your life that may hinder you on your own path to self-awareness and to moving forward? I want to explore the physical and the shamanic view of our chakras. Today I want to discuss what is designed to inform our conscious mind and our spiritual mind, specifics regarding the health, the spirit, and the physical interpretation of each chakra. There are 7 major chakras of the body. I'd mentioned that before. Now there are each chakra. There are 7 major chakras of the body. I'd mentioned that before. Now there are many other traditions that teach that there are more than that, and I'm not going to argue with that at all. All I'm going to say is that we're just going to deal with the basics today. So the crown is chakra number 7. The element that I associate with it and that others associated with it is spirit. The gland it seems to affect, and when we do different yoga poses for the crown, it affects the pineal gland. The color is generally violet or white, and the function is the upper brain and the right eye, primarily. The forehead, now that's your third eye, that's the 6th chakra. The element is light, and the gland is the pituitary, relationship to the third eye. The lower brain, the left ear, left eye, the ears, the nose, and the nervous system are all stated to be affected by the 6th chakra. Number 5 is the throat chakra, the element of sound, the thyroid, the color blue. So this would be your bronchial and your vocal, your vocalization, the organs that help you vocalize, like your lungs. The heart is your 4th, the element of air, and the gland, thymus. Green, maybe pink, obviously the heart. Blood, the vagus nerve, circulatory system. And then we come to the vagus nerve, circulatory system. And then we come to that ever important solar plexus, chakra 3, the element of fire, and the delicate pancreas, and the all-important pancreas. Yellow, gold, the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, the nervous system. And number 2, the sacral, water, your gonads, orange, your conception vessels. Your base, 1st chakra, earth, your adrenals, your energy, red, your spinal column, your kidneys. It is interesting to note that I have a person on a table in front of me, and I'm going to take my pendulum and I'm going to go over top of each of the chakras, the 7 chakras. What I'm trying to say is that when reading another person's chakra, you can affect the way the pendulum moves. And how, you might ask? Now, that's a good question. What we do is recreate a push, as if you're pushing your energy onto theirs. So I encourage you not to lean over the person when you're doing delicate pendulum work. Remember to stand back. And sometimes when we lean over, we may pick up in the chakras that we are, depending on how empathic we are, how much we relate our physical body to the physical body of the person we're working on. And we can feel what that person is feeling in our own chakras. Feel what that person is feeling in our own chakras. We are that mirror. If you are unable or you really don't want to do these exercises with another person, if you're alone, I suggest you use a body chart as a way of referencing your own experience. So one hand will hold the pendulum over the chart, and your free hand you will touch to use your chakras. So the pendulum can be in the left or the right hand, depending if you're left or right-handed. And then the free hand you place just above the chakra. I don't really recommend you touch it, but you want to feel that energy just above it. So on the graph or on the body form, you would have your hand corresponding to where you put the pendulum on the body form that you're working from. And once you have put the pendulum down, make a notation of it, make a notation of how you feel about it, make a notation of how you experience it. I really trust that your pendulum will move with very accurate readings for your own chakras. I really do trust in that. And I know if you were alone and working on this on your own and you want to read yourself, what I would suggest that you do is some nice deep breath work prior and center yourself, and then move into exploring your chakras with the pendulum. Center, connect with spirit, and everything will go really well. What I like to do is I start by holding the cord of the pendulum between my thumb and my forefinger, about 10 or 15 centimeters, and for you who don't know what that is, that's 4 to 6 inches, above each chakra. Getting comfortable with the relationship with your pendulum, that can take time. And as you grow more comfortable with the relationship and how it reads pendulums, you can take readings of the chakras from the different aura fields. So I like to place the chakra close to the body, maybe even less than 10 or 15 centimeters. And then I raise the pendulum up to see what that etherical body, and then up, and what is the causal body, what is that outside body, that energetic body, because each energetic body has given me different information, and they don't all spin the same. And I would have thought that they all spin the same, but they really don't. And that kind of adds more complexity to what I really wish to talk about today. So, possible interpretations of the pendulum. So if the pendulum moves clockwise, it is often thought that it is open and well balanced, and that is taking in energy and is fully functional. Unless the movement of the pendulum is really wide and really fast, because this can indicate the opposite, that there's an unbalance. One of the interpretations is from a yoga master that I've studied with. If the chakra is moving clockwise, it is healthy and releasing energy. If the chakra is moving counterclockwise, it's taking energy from the source into itself. So that's another interpretation. So those two is an illustration of the difference of schools of thought. And if we are not comfortable with our own intuition, we need to practice the individual chakra, as well as how the chakras are relating to one another. It takes time to learn how to observe, as well as how to work with any worthwhile tool. If the pendulum moves counterclockwise, then there may be blocked energy or negative experiences with the feelings relating to that chakra. So spinning counterclockwise and elliptical, I interpret as distorted or sending energy out of the system. So elliptical, so let's say that the pendulum swings in a circular-ish fashion, but it's not in a circle, so it's forming an elliptical. And you will see that. That does happen. If the pendulum is moving in an elliptical swing, there may be a right or a left side imbalance of energy flowing in the body. So this can be due to overusing the right or the masculine side, or the left, the nurturing, receiving side. So it may be, if it's swinging much to the right, that there's a lot of expression or release of energy. And if it's really missing the left side, then that taking energy in, that taking in of cosmic energy, or even nurturing of self, is really at an imbalance. That is an interpretation for that. If the pendulum moves in an erratic swing, and I've seen that lots of times, I've even seen the pendulum bounce up and down as though it's like a bouncy ball on a string. So it moves in an erratic swing. It's possible that the person you're working with may have recently changed their beliefs or is going through a spiritual upheaval. And those things, as we all know, they can affect how your body feels. So they affect how those chakras move. And it can cause it to move erratically for a couple of days and sometimes even longer. If the pendulum is still for a long time, so if you hold it over one of the chakras and it's still, it's possible that chakra is unhealthy and may have a blockage. It is possible, too, that a still chakra is simply in the process of changing its spin, in which case it is not as much of a concern. A flat chakra, so horizontal, vertical, left or right, is taking in very little energy and is compacting it, holding it down. So all these things aside, if the pendulum is not moving at all, consider you're holding the pendulum in the incorrect location. One of the very first dowsing workshops I took many, many years ago, the dowser was this really old, much older gentleman. At that time I was in my 20s, so you know when you're 20 everybody's old. And he was in his 60s, and he said that if the energy isn't moving, maybe you're the one that's stuck. So shake your hand or move your hand up and down, and that will give some catalyst to the energy and allow the energy to flow. Alternatively, what I do, or inversely, what I do is when I'm reading someone's chakra and the pendulum is moving, in order to stop it, I jerk it up quickly and then drop it down, and it becomes to a dead stop. And then I move over to the next chakra. I don't want to take the energy of one chakra into another. Not that they don't. Try holding the pendulum in another way. Try moving it slightly. It does not hurt, to be sure. And if it is a still chakra, then you can determine in another way whether it's going to have a blockage or an unblockage. So be aware that the size of the pendulum circle is a combination of your energy field, the pendulum's energy field, and your partner's energy field, or the person you're working on. This means that your own chakra health and the health of your own energy field may have a direct impact on how you're reading others' chakras. The same as earlier I said that sometimes my body responds to how that person's chakra is feeling. And sometimes my chakras respond before a person even gets to my house. So check your posture. Make sure you're not leaning into the auric field of your partner. And make sure you're not leaning into the auric field of your partner. And above all, have fun. and you're learning. You have to make mistakes. If you don't make mistakes or question your interpretation, then you are not learning. You're not growing. And it is important to learn and to grow because we are all on this journey together. And if we can come together and learn things in a warm and loving and concise fashion, it certainly makes it easier to process that information. So compassion for yourself, compassion for the people you're reading. Know you won't get it right, but trust your intuition above all. And thank you very much for listening. And the next podcast we'll do is called Chakra Guardians. And this is the shamanic technique that my spirits have taught me as a way of keeping healthy knowledge of how my chakras are going and how they're feeling. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.